On Labor Day of 1977, Susan Klingel and Jarrett Betterson were driving with their 2-year-old daughter, Nikole, in or near Dearborn, Michigan. Maybe it was a weekend trip for the holiday, or maybe they were just running errands, but by the end of the day, only 2 of them would still be alive. And that's just one of the tragedies of this story, not part of the mystery. The mystery would come later. This week on Out of the Past, the search for Nikole Betterson. On their drive, Jarrett lost control of his car, causing it to roll 3 or 4 times. He and little Nikole were fine, but Susan wasn't wearing her seatbelt and was thrown from the car. She was found dead several meters away. Police were suspicious of Jarrett and searched the car, where they found a stash of marijuana. It's been said that the police wanted to charge him with vehicular homicide for driving under the influence, but nothing ever came of it. After the accident, a decision had to be made about what to do with Nikole. Susan and Jarrett weren't married, and she and Nikole didn't live with him. Susan's parents never really liked Jarrett. He and Susan blamed it on her parents' racism. The Klingels blamed it on Jarrett introducing Susan to drugs. So after the accident, Nikole stayed with her maternal grandparents for several months until Jarrett showed up on their doorstep again out of the blue. He had met a new woman named Barbara Sadler, and the 2 of them were ready to start a family together. Jarrett wanted custody of his daughter so they could start a new life out west. Barbara insisted to the Klingels that she would do everything in her power to be the best mother she could be to Nikole. They had their reservations, but they let the child go. Jarrett was Nikole's father, after all. He had a right to raise her. After a tearful goodbye, the new family was on the road. The Klingels waved at the car and wondered when they would get to see their granddaughter again. They told some people they were headed to California and others to Las Vegas. Nobody knew where they ended up because nobody back in Dearborn, Michigan would hear from either of them for over 20 years. The Klingels wondered about Nikole over the years, but they tried to have faith that her father and Barbara were raising her right. They decided to wait until after she was an adult to start looking for her. That way, she could make a reasonable decision about whether she wanted her grandparents in her life. So, they waited patiently until the 1990s. By then, they were growing old and were desperate to find their only heir. They hired a private detective, Peggy Bezzi. Bezzi tried for some time to find any trace of Nikole without luck. Then, she had what seemed like a huge break. Jarrett and his wife Barbara were living in Las Vegas. But it was just the 2 of them. There was no sign of Nikole. Bezzi searched through local school registration records, but was unable to find any child that could be connected to the Bettersons. What she was shocked to find out, however, was that Nikole had been eligible for a benefit check from the government because she had lost her mother. And even though there was no sign of a child anywhere in their lives, Jarrett Betterson still collected this check every month until Nikole's 18th birthday. This was when Bezzi contacted local law enforcement. She told Detective Jeff Roskin about her suspicions, but he was hesitant to move forward. With the large volume of missing person cases in Las Vegas, he was already swamped with other work. But there was something intriguing about the case. Roskin wanted to know what happened to Nikole, so he decided to move forward with the investigation. Like Bezzi, Roskin could not find a trace of any child ever having lived with the Bettersons in Las Vegas. He went through family court records, police records, driver's license records, all the things that Bezzi didn't have access to. He found nothing. There was no record of the child after leaving Michigan. To all appearances, it seemed like Nikole had disappeared sometime in 1978. Roskin thought through his next steps very carefully. He had to approach Jarrett the right way if he ever wanted any chance of knowing what happened to Nikole. He decided to lie to Jarrett, to tell him that he already knew what happened to her. If Jarrett thought they already had enough evidence to convict him, Roskin reasoned, it would give him no way out. And that's exactly what happened, though things didn't go down quite the way Roskin thought they would. Roskin obtained the Bettersons' address. It wasn't in a great part of town. When he arrived, he found their home dilapidated and dirty. He knocked on the door, and a man in an electric wheelchair opened the door a few seconds later. Roskin was slightly taken aback by the man in front of him. It was Jarrett Betterson, but he was in very poor health despite only being in his 40s. Jarrett explained that a bus crash had put him in the wheelchair years earlier. His wife Barbara was also in extremely poor health, but it wasn't clear what was wrong with her. This was when Roskin began his master plan. He confronted Jarrett about Nikole. He lied with confidence, telling the man in the wheelchair that he already knew the truth, and a confession would convince the state to go lighter on his sentence. He told Jarrett he would be brought in front of a grand jury to force the information out of him if he didn't cooperate. To say Jarrett was shaken would be an understatement. Trying to keep his cool, he told Detective Roskin that he would be willing to cooperate with the investigation, but he needed a little bit of time to prepare some things. Some newspaper sources claimed that he even told Roskin he needed time to contact Nikole. About 10 days later, he called Roskin and asked for more time. Roskin agreed, but when the detective tried to follow up with the suspect, he got no response. Roskin gave him his time, but Jarrett had no intention of actually cooperating. When Roskin returned from his Christmas vacation, there were stacks of memos on his desk. Memos from the homicide unit. He called them right away. Jarrett and Barbara Betterson were found dead in their home on December 22nd of 1997. Barbara had been shot twice in the heart while lying on a waterbed. She was clutching a Bible in one hand and a cross in the other. A red rose was placed upon her chest. Jarrett Betterson was found in the next bedroom. He was covered with a blanket and had suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Jarrett and Barbara were 49 and 50, respectively. Barbara had sent a final letter to her mother-in-law, Joni Betterson, who hadn't seen her son or Barbara in over 20 years. The letter read, in part, "We've tried to follow God. Now it's time for him to judge us. By the time you read this, we should be dead. Jarrett is about to go to jail, and I don't want to live without him. I'm sorry about living apart from our family. I'm sorry about so many things. We've had a sad and difficult life." The letter concluded, "Go to your Bibles to seek peace, and please forgive us for all the wounds we have put in your hearts with our tragic and youthful blunders." Barbara also enclosed a money order for $900 as advance payment for her and Jarrett's cremation. She requested that their ashes be placed in the same urn. Their bodies were not found until 3 weeks after the letter was received, and when they were, there were multiple bills and eviction notices pasted on the door. It's shocking that their bodies were decomposing in there for all that time and nobody seemed to notice an odor. Several different people had obviously visited the front door multiple times, but nobody noticed anything, or if they did, they didn't call the police. The police searched the apartment thoroughly for any evidence that could help solve their mystery. There was no suicide note, but there was a note on the fridge, apologizing to the apartment management for the mess they'd left. Lieutenant Wayne Peterson stumbled upon a folder that contained the only evidence of Jarrett's old life. Inside were Susan's death certificate, some pictures of Jarrett and Susan in their apartment back in 1977, and a report on the accident. There was no evidence that Nikole ever existed. What the Bettersons didn't know was that Detective Roskin had been bluffing. The state had no case. They had no evidence at all, in fact. Jarrett's behavior after Roskin's bluff suggested strongly that he knew what happened to Nikole. Now they were left with 2 dead bodies and a mystery that could never be solved. Maybe if Roskin had been a little less cocky and didn't bluff about the evidence, we might have been able to learn what happened to Nikole. But now we probably won't ever know. The information was right there, and we missed our only opportunity to learn what happened. Most people think that Nikole is dead. Many don't think that she even made it past 1978. When the police searched the Betterson home, there was absolutely no evidence that a third person ever lived there. Jarrett somehow made Nikole vanish without a trace. The most frustrating thing to me is that Jarrett did not have to take Nikole with him on his journey out west. She wasn't living in his custody. She was living a good life with her grandparents, and they didn't want things to change. Jarrett picked up this little girl and ripped her away from a loving family for what? So he could collect her checks? Did she die accidentally? Was she abducted by a stranger? Did Jarrett and/or Barbara try to sell her? Did they kill her? We probably won't ever know. If Nikole Betterson is still out there today, she would be in her mid-40s. She is mixed race and has curly black hair. If you know anything at all, please call Crimestoppers or your local authorities. I'll have the phone numbers pasted in the description box. If you would like to provide aid to families who are searching for missing loved ones, please consider making a donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They can always use all the help they can get. That's all for this week. Please remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Out of the Past.